So this is the first part of our history of food trucks. So we only have one part of this little lecture, but then you have a assignment that kind of goes along with it. So the assignment for the history of food trucks is that you are going to comment what kind of food truck you are thinking about doing and what type of food interests you. So this is kind of open-ended and you are able to choose how you want to continue on with this project. So this is not a history class, so I'm not going to give you guys every detail about what happened and why, but I'm just going to give you a little bit to show how these food trucks have evolved, where we're at now with them, and there's a couple of videos also. So in the 1600s, the first food truck developed push carts. So these really started in New York City, and they had really strict regulations that were enforced by police officers as well as property owners. To follow those regulations, the food vendors decided, how can I get around some of these? So they realized that the property owners and the police were agreeable to bribes. So then they created bribes, and the police officers and property owners kind of removed some of those regulations that they had to follow. Moving on into the 1866, the next thing was the chuck wagons. So these were popular on the prairies that provided food for cowboys and miners. So out in the prairies, there's not very many places where you could store your food, where you could prepare your food and whatnot. So a Texas cattle rancher started the chuck wagons, where he used an army wagon and fitted its interior with storage doors stocked with kitchenware and food supplies. Then in 1872 became the lunch wagon. So this was a covered wagon that they modified by adding in windows, and they sold sandwiches, pies, and coffee to pressmen and journalists in front of a newspaper office in Rhode Island. So once this kind of was developed, they started adding in models that had the sinks, refrigerators, cooking stoves, and other options for people to cook and how to warm up their food and how to store their food. And then moving into the 1917s, they started making their vehicles that rode around with the food stations on them. So this kind of created the official food truck. So they started out operating on the army bases around the 1900s, and then by the 1950s, ice cream vans kind of started to come about, and by the 1960s, they had their bigger food trucks that got started. So they had tacos and burgers and things like that, where they sold to construction sites and factories. Those unfortunately got a bad name, bad reputation, and they started calling those the roach coaches because of the dirty vending locations that they were at. Moving into 1936 became the Oscar Mayer vehicle. So this was the first portable hot dog car. So it's shaped like a hot dog on a bun, which is used to promote and advertise Oscar Mayer products. So the drivers of these cars were actually called hot doggers, and this position was open to any U.S. citizen, and the job lasted from the 1st of June until the following 1st of June. So they had this position for a year, and only college seniors who are about to graduate were eligible to become the hot doggers. So this was all used to advertise the Oscar Mayer Wiener and the Wienermobiles to kind of get their name out there and promote their restaurant. So the Oscar Mayer was Wiener Schnitzel, where they are most popular for their hot dogs and chili dogs and all that good stuff. So then moving into the 1950s was the ice cream truck. So the ice cream wasn't invented until 1904. So these 1920s models kind of started to have advances in refrigeration, which meant electric coolers replaced ice deliveries. And then the first ice cream truck was actually made in Ohio, and he came up with the idea of chocolate-covered ice cream bars on a stick, and he delivered the ice cream from his motorized vehicle and realized the ice cream sucker was easy and clean to sell to those on the street. And back then, ice cream was only a nickel, so that's kind of crazy. Then in the 1960s to the 1980s, the roach coaches, the first taco trucks and grease trucks. So I kind of talked about this a couple slides ago, but these kind of started developing. They were the grease trucks. They had all the food that was easy for people to access on job sites, and they were able to go kind of wherever they needed it. So then, as it kept developing, the food trucks started to get recognized, and they actually have this takes you to a website where they have a street vendor and they are actually competing against each other, and it's pretty cool. And then they started becoming more specialized and having different things to do for their food trucks. So then in 2010, they started the Great Food Truck Race. So we're going to watch this little clip, and it's going to show you guys a little bit about what they do, kind of the food that they have.
Hi there, I'm Tyler Florence. Welcome to a brand new season of the Great Food Truck Race. Who's hungry? Since we started, food trucks have become a mainstay in the culinary world. It's amazing. From fast food to 4-star, food trucks now cover it all. Come on, get your bacon loud, people. And each year, we search the country for people who think they have what it takes to run one. Oh man, this is what I'm talking about. It's the American dream. Let's open up our own food truck, baby. On wheels. This year, we've got 8 brand new teams, each with a common goal: to go into business for themselves.
It's the prettiest truck.
What they'll learn? Running a food truck is not easy.
I'm freaking out.
It takes passion,
I'm having so much fun.
commitment, and creativity. Oh, mamacita, what can you cook for me? Each week, our teams will roll into a new city. Yeehaw! For a wild weekend of cooking
This is not sizzling.
and selling.
Are you hungry, Austin?
Along the way, we'll challenge their cooking skills,
Sonoran hot dog. Now what is that?
their business sense,
We ran out of food.
and their patience.
Where is everybody?
That is going on.
So the Great Food Truck Race was really just a bunch of people that there was 8 teams that got together and started creating this contest between each other and kind of a rivalry. Sorry, I can't say that word right now. And then moving on to 2011, they kind of started changing these, so making really specialized restaurant, or not, they're not really restaurants, but they're kind of they're food trucks on, so it's a restaurant on wheels, we'll say. So like this one is DC Empanadas. So this was kind of a gourmet empanada that was in Washington, DC. And then moving on, they made a movie which is called The Chef, and so this really just features different food trucks and coming together and creating a food that they can show off to everyone. So this is kind of how food trucks have evolved, and so what you are to do now is to go on and just create a comment and let me know what kind of food truck you might want to do, what food you want to specialize in, and let's really just get this going and start getting your brain working on, what do I want to do? What food interests me? What's my favorite food? If you really love ice cream, check out the different assignment that's posted for the restaurant menu and see what you really want to do.